Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Today we are unpacking the ultimate collision of worldviews, God and faith versus atheism and Satanism. We are analyzing a fascinating raw debate from a show called Counterpoint, where practicing Christians and non-theistic Satanists sat down to hash out the heaviest questions of human existence. From the true meaning of freedom and the origins of morality to the problem of human suffering and whether hell is a literal lake of fire or just a literary symbol. We're looking at why some people find ultimate peace in divine submission, while others find their power in radical self-autonomy. It is a profound look at how humans search for meaning. If you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button, because today we are diving into some incredibly deep waters, and we really want you right here with us as we navigate them.
Absolutely. And, setting the stage for you, the mission of this deep dive is completely impartial. We are not here to declare a winner or to, tell you which side is correct. We are looking at highly charged, deeply personal source material. So our goal is really just to extract the core philosophies from both sides of the aisle. We want to help you understand the foundational why behind these opposing belief systems, and we'll be laying out the arguments and the logic exactly as they were presented by the panelists themselves.
Okay, let's unpack this. The moderator actually kicked things off with a question that immediately flips the traditional script, which was, does Satan or God represent true freedom?
Right. And it forces both sides to define their terms right out of the gate. From the perspective of the Satanist panelists, we have to clarify right away that they are non-theistic. So they do not view Satan as a literal entity with horns and a pitchfork living under the earth.
Yeah, no supernatural belief there at all.
Exactly. Instead, Satan is the ultimate literary symbol of freedom, rebellion, and the pursuit of knowledge. They draw really heavy parallels to the Greek myth of Prometheus, the titan who defied the gods to bring the fire of knowledge to humanity.
Bringing light into the darkness, even if it means being punished for it.
That is the core of it. I mean, in their worldview, the mythological Satan in the Garden of Eden offered Adam and Eve the tree of knowledge to help them escape what the panelists actually call the tyranny of heaven. Freedom, to a Satanist, is the allowance to experience life in all its facets. It's the ability to walk a path that isn't pre-mapped out by a creator and, to make your own ethical decisions without the looming external pressure of a supreme authority dictating your every single move.
Which is fascinating because the Christian panelists approach the concept of freedom from an entirely different universe. For them, the satanic maxim of do what thou wilt isn't actually freedom at all. It's a recipe for total anarchy. They argue that absolute self-autonomy ultimately leads to self-destruction, shame, and guilt because human nature is inherently flawed. They liken God to a protective parent. Think about it like this. If a parent physically stops a toddler from touching a hot stove, they aren't restricting the child's freedom to explore the kitchen. They are actively protecting them from severe harm. To the Christians, true freedom is actually being saved from our own destructive, sinful nature.
And that concept of rules actually creating freedom can be hard to grasp from the outside. But one of the Christian panelists grounded it in a really personal anecdote. He described growing up in the church and getting baptized purely as what he called salvation insurance.
Salvation insurance, wow.
Yeah, he was terrified of hell, so he just went through the motions to secure his afterlife. But internally, he was still living by the do what thou wilt philosophy.
And he admitted he was absolutely miserable doing that. I mean, he was doing whatever he wanted, chasing every desire, but finding himself in darker and darker emotional places. His argument was that it wasn't until he genuinely surrendered to God's boundaries that he realized those rules weren't keeping him from having fun. They were the guardrails keeping his life from driving off a cliff, which ultimately provided a much fuller, freer existence.
This raises an important question. If you remove that supreme authority setting the guardrails, how do you determine what the rules of life should even be? Which transitions us right into their intense debate on objective versus subjective morality.
Yeah, the Christian argument anchors itself heavily on the idea that without an unchanging objective standard, namely God morality is nothing more than personal opinion. One of the Christian panelists illustrated this with the pizza analogy.
Oh, that was a great analogy.
Right. The logic goes like this. If morality is just based on shifting cultural norms or individual feelings, then saying murder is wrong carries no more universal weight than saying I dislike pizza. It literally just becomes a preference. Society might agree today that murder is bad, but without a higher law, society could change its mind tomorrow. So to them, God is the necessary, immovable anchor. God's nature is perfectly good, God is consistent, and therefore God is the ultimate standard by which humans can measure right and wrong.
But the Satanist and atheist panelists completely reject that premise. They argue that human beings do not need a single ultimate authority to know right from wrong. Instead, they believe our moral compass is forged by empathy and by our evolution as a society. One panelist framed it beautifully, actually. He stated that their morality stems simply from wanting everyone to go to sleep comfortable, well-fed, and warm.
Which makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint.
Yeah.
We are social creatures.
Exactly. We survive better when we cooperate, so we naturally develop systems that want the best for those around us.
They also really push back on the idea of getting morality from a single source text.
Yes. One panelist specifically explained that his morals weren't derived from just one book, like the Bible, but from thousands of books. He cited authors like Robert A. Heinlein, Isaac Asimov, Robert Jordan, and even Grimm's fairy tales. By absorbing thousands of complex narratives about human struggle, triumph, and consequence, he argues you build a far more robust understanding of good and evil than you would by just following the decrees of ancient scripture.
Let's test the logic of the Christian argument, though, because the atheistic side brought up a massive philosophical counterpunch. They introduced Plato's Euthyphro dilemma. If you aren't familiar with it, basically asks this: does God invent what is good? Or is God just enforcing a standard of good that already exists out there in the universe?
And it is a devastating logical trap if you believe in divine morality. The panelists broke it down like this. If God can just declare anything to be good, then morality is completely arbitrary. God could wake up tomorrow and declare that cruelty is good, and you just have to accept it. On the other hand, if goodness comes before God, if God is just following a universal law of goodness, then God isn't the ultimate source of reality. Something higher than God created the concept of good.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because you can debate philosophy all day, but the debate naturally progressed to the reality of the human experience. Specifically, the problem of pain. If God is all-loving and all-powerful, why is there so much immense, unbearable suffering in the world? We are going to look at exactly how both sides tackle this, remaining strictly impartial, because honestly, you could feel the emotional weight in the room totally shift during the segment.
You really could. For the Satanist panelists, the raw evidence of their own senses completely shatters the concept of an all-loving, all-powerful deity. One panelist cited his experience working at Nebraska Medicine during the height of the 2020 pandemic. He described watching people die horribly, literally drowning in their own fluids. His argument is that a just, powerful God simply wouldn't allow that level of agonizing, pointless suffering.
It's a heavy, heavy reality to confront.
It is. And even more heartbreaking, another Satanist panelist showed the tragic story of his own son being murdered. He looked across the table and asked where God's love was on the day his son was beaten to death. The conclusion he drew from that unimaginable trauma is that the universe is simply cold, uncaring, and entirely indifferent to human pain. There is no grand plan, and there is no ultimate morality behind the curtain.
The Christians often point to the sacrifice of Jesus as proof of God's love for humanity, but the Satanist panelists challenged that narrative directly, didn't they?
They did. One boldly argued that since Christian doctrine states Jesus resurrected after 3 days, he didn't actually sacrifice his life for our sins. He just, quote, gave up his weekend.
Wow. And the Christian panelists met that grief and that intense skepticism with a lot of empathy, but they held incredibly firm to their reality. To the father who lost his son, a Christian gently pointed out their theological belief that God actually knows exactly how that agonizing grief feels, because God's own son was murdered too. They argue that God gave humanity the ultimate gift of free will, and the terrifying flip side of free will is that humans sometimes use it to commit terrible evils against one another.
But they don't believe God is distant or indifferent to that evil. They believe God suffers right alongside us in those dark moments and possesses the unique power to ultimately redeem those tragedies, weaving them into a broader tapestry of ultimate good that we simply cannot see from our very limited human perspective.
And they didn't just rely on ancient history either. They brought in intense, modern-day personal testimonies to back up their belief in God's active power. They claim to have witnessed modern miracles, physical healings, chains of severe addiction breaking overnight. One pastor even claimed to have seen a person suffering from schizophrenia walk into a deliverance ministry and be completely cured.
And we should probably define that for you, as it's a very specific term. A deliverance ministry is a practice within certain Christian circles focused on casting out demons or breaking spiritual strongholds that they believe are causing physical or mental affliction. To these panelists, the power of God isn't an abstract concept from a dusty book. It is a visceral, undeniable reality they interact with daily.
What's fascinating here is how these two entirely different realities collide when discussing the end of the human story. I mean, if you view life, morality, and suffering this differently, your view on the afterlife is going to be worlds apart.
Let's look at the concept of hell. Because the Satanists do not believe in any literal afterlife, hell is purely a symbolic concept. They reference John Milton's epic poem Paradise Lost. Specifically, the iconic idea that the mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, or a hell of heaven. Hell is the psychological torment we create for ourselves right here on Earth.
They also dig into the historical origins of the word.
Yes, they note that the ancient Hebrew word Sheol, which is often translated as hell in older texts, essentially just referred to the grave. It meant a discard pile, a pit, or simply the state of being forgotten by your lineage. It wasn't originally a realm of eternal fire. Furthermore, they pointed out a massive logical contradiction at the heart of modern Christian doctrine. How could an infinitely loving God sentence a generally good person to eternal torment simply because they lacked belief based on what atheists see as insufficient evidence?
The Christian response to that is that hell is a literal place of ultimate accountability. They point out that Jesus actually spoke about hell around 70 times in the biblical text. In their theology, hell wasn't originally created to torture humanity. It was created for rebellious angels who tried to overthrow God. But if a human uses their free will to align with that same rebellion and rejects their creator, they are choosing to go to a place entirely separated from God's presence.
But the Christian side wasn't entirely monolithic on this, which was super interesting. One Christian panelist brought a highly specific theological breakdown that totally challenges the pop culture image of people immediately burning in fire the second they die.
This was a wild nuance. This panelist argued that hell, as we culturally understand it, might not be eternal torture right off the bat. He broke down the original translations of the different words used in the Bible, words like Sheol, Tartarus, and Gehenna. He suggested that, currently, the unrighteous go to a temporary holding place, the Greek concept of Hades or the Hebrew Sheol. In this holding place, the torment is actually entirely emotional. It is the weeping and gnashing of teeth that comes from the agonizing realization that they missed out on God's invitation.
Meanwhile, the righteous are kept safe in a different compartment of this holding place, traditionally referred to as Abraham's bosom, which is an ancient Jewish concept representing a place of comfort and rest for the faithful dead as they await final resurrection.
According to his specific view, it is only at the very end of time, at the final judgment, that a literal lake of fire, translated from the word Gehenna, is utilized. And its purpose isn't infinite torture. Its purpose is to permanently eradicate evil from existence so that God can restore the earth back to the flawless perfection of Eden. It's a complex, multi-layered system of divine justice that totally rethinks the pitchforks and fire narrative.
Listening to all of this, you might find yourself asking the exact same question the moderator posed to the non-theistic side. If you don't believe in a literal devil and you don't believe in a literal hell, why call yourself a Satanist? Why invite all that cultural baggage? Why not just call yourself an atheist and be done with it?
Yeah, it almost seems like you're just picking a fight by using that specific word.
It does seem that way, but the panelists describe this as a post-atheistic worldview. One of them broke down the history, explaining that the massive wave of new atheism in the 1990s and early 2000s acted like a sledgehammer. It was highly effective at destroying old religious systems, pointing out logical fallacies and declaring, "These ancient myths no longer serve us."
But the hammer didn't build anything new to replace what it smashed.
Exactly the problem. It left an entire generation with a profound existential void. Human beings are fundamentally social creatures. We are wired to need stories that explain our place in the universe. We need relatable symbols to rally behind. We need rituals to mark the passage of time from birth to death. And we desperately need a community to belong to. For these individuals, pure atheism was too sterile. Satanism provides that exact structural and communal framework of religion, just without the supernatural deity at the center of it.
So it is entirely about reclaiming a symbol of power. One panelist shared his personal story of growing up in a very strict, traditional religious environment. In his youth, anything that was even slightly counterculture, whether it was playing Dungeons and Dragons, listening to rock and roll, or just asking too many questions, was immediately labeled satanic by the adults around him.
So instead of constantly running from that label and defending themselves, he and others decided to lean into it. They embraced the symbol of the ultimate rebel and forged it into an identity centered around self-love, self-worth, and absolute bodily autonomy.
Another panelist framed it using the concepts of the left-hand path versus the right-hand path. To define that for you, traditional right-hand path religions are typically dogmatic. They emphasize strict adherence to rules, obedience to a higher power, and claim to have all the black and white answers written down in a sacred text. Satanism operates on the left-hand path, which focuses entirely on the individual. It's about breaking cultural taboos, questioning authority, and being comfortable living in the gray areas of life. It's about having the grace to admit you don't have all the answers to the universe, but you are going to figure out your own meaning while you're here.
So what does this all mean? How did these massive, abstract philosophies actually play out when you have to wake up, go to work, and live your life on a random Tuesday? We can look at how these clashing lifestyles handle two very real, practical things: forgiveness and Halloween.
The divide on forgiveness is incredibly stark. Because Satanists believe they are the absolute masters of their own destiny, they view personal responsibility with immense, unforgiving weight. If they make a mistake, they believe they must rectify it right now in this life because there is no heavenly safety net to fall back on.
Consequently, if someone commits a grievous wrong against them, they do not prescribe to the idea of turning the other cheek. One panelist described it as setting a line of fire. If someone crosses that boundary and harms them deeply, they demand real, tangible restitution. If that person crosses the line a second time, their philosophy is to scorch the earth. They will cut you out entirely. It is a justice system based strictly on human boundaries, earned trust, and immediate consequences.
Contrast that with a Christian approach, which is built on the concept of radical, unmerited grace. The Christian panelists readily acknowledge that they, too, make terrible mistakes and have deeply hurt people. But their core operating system is the belief that the creator of the universe has completely forgiven them for their own massive trespasses.
Because they have received that profound grace, they believe they are mandated to extend that exact same forgiveness to those who hurt them. It doesn't mean they think what the abuser did was okay, and it doesn't mean they don't set boundaries. But it means they release the psychological burden of revenge. They let go of the need to balance the scales themselves, trusting that an all-knowing, perfect God will enact ultimate justice in the end.
And then we have Halloween. It perfectly illustrates their day-to-day cultural differences. For the Satanists, Halloween is not just a fun night to dress up. It is a high holiday. They use it as a profound ritual to mark the turning of the seasons, a designated moment to exercise safe indulgence, and an opportunity to deliberately face their macabre fears so they can psychologically move past them.
It is also deeply communal and surprisingly charitable. One satanic congregation mentioned using the holiday to organize community charity, specifically highlighting a recent event where they raised $900 for a trans mutual aid fund.
The Christians are pretty split on how to handle the 31st of October. Some take a very hardline defensive stance. They view the holiday's roots and imagery as genuinely demonic, so they choose to completely opt out, believing it's spiritually unwise to participate in anything even loosely associated with darkness or the occult.
But other Christians take a totally different, highly offensive approach. One pastor talked about hosting a massive trunk-or-treat event in their church parking lot, giving out candy to the neighborhood. His philosophy: the devil doesn't get a day on the calendar. He views Halloween as an active mission field, a chance to march right into the middle of the culture and be a light in the darkness, reclaiming the day for their community.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, looking at everything we've analyzed today, what is truly remarkable is the underlying similarity in the human pursuit. You have two groups with radically opposing aesthetics. They use completely different labels, and they hold completely contradictory views on the supernatural, the afterlife, and the origin of the universe.
Yet ultimately, they are both seeking the exact same fundamental things. They are both trying to build a coherent, logical framework to understand right and wrong in a chaotic world. They are both searching desperately for a reliable way to navigate the heavy, inescapable burden of human suffering. And above all, they are both seeking a community where they can be understood, belong, and find a sense of ultimate purpose.
It really makes you wonder about the intricate wiring of humanity itself. So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. If the human brain is so deeply wired to require ritual, physical symbols, and a grand moral narrative, that even those who completely reject the concept of God end up creating a highly structured religion around the ultimate symbol of rebellion, does that prove that we are simply biological storytellers trying to invent a fire to survive the dark? Or does it hint that we are actually designed at our very core to worship something, even if that something is ultimately just ourselves? Keep questioning, keep exploring, and thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.